Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started today. So thank you for joining us for our second ACES webinar of 2019. Today, Chaviva Gordon-Bennett will be discussing copy editing for inbound marketing. Chaviva is a senior copywriter and editor at SmartBug Media. As a senior copywriter, Chaviva writes inbound marketing content for SmartBug's clients and is responsible for managing a crop of freelance writers and editors. She's worked in digital marketing and social media management in addition to writing and editing. If you have questions during the webinar today, feel free to post them in the Q&A section. I'll jump in periodically to have Chaviva answer your questions, and we will have a Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and a link will be sent out following today's presentation along with the survey, so you can let us know how we did. Thanks again for joining us today, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chaviva.
Hi, everybody. Happy Thursday. I'm so excited to be presenting this to you. This is writing and editing for inbound marketing. I'm coming to you from Denver, Colorado. Again, my name is Chaviva Gordon-Bennett. I'm a senior copywriter and editor at SmartBug Media. It's an entirely remote inbound marketing agency, which means that our 60-plus employees are located all the way around the country, basically, in a couple of Canadian provinces as well. And we have 2 senior copywriters on staff. My counterpart is actually also a copy editor by trade, but he's a sports journalist. So it makes for some fun conversations about editing and style. It's pretty fun. I drink a lot of coffee. I live in Colorado. I'm obsessed with Instagram. I've got 3 kids. And my husband's from England, which also makes for an interesting conversation point with spelling. So that's a bit about me and who I am. So let's get started. What are we going to cover in this webinar? Okay, so I'm going to do a really quick look at how people read online. And then I'm going to go into what inbound marketing is, because it's not your traditional form of marketing. And then I'm going to go through some pro tips about editing inbound content. And then we're going to end with some questions and answers. And there are quite a few GIFs on this, or GIFs if you prefer. And they're all from Giphy.com because I'm a big fan of GIFs. Oh, and also if you're live tweeting this, hashtag AcesWeb19 is the hashtag. So there is some stuff up on there on the Twitters, and I can respond after the webinar if you've got some other questions. All right, so let's look at how people read online really quickly. A lot of this is probably going to be an overview, a review for you. If you've been to some other ACES webinars, or if you're used to writing or editing content for the web. So 79% of people scan web pages. And this is actually according to some pretty outdated usability surveys. There haven't been any recent usability surveys, so I'm guessing this number is actually probably higher than this right now. So that means that people don't read, they scan, right? So just 16% of people actually report reading every single word on a page. And again, that's from a pretty outdated survey. People just don't have the time. It's much different than sitting down and reading something that's sitting in front of you, obviously. And there's also a lot of distractions, right? So a majority of adults are reading at a 3rd grade level. And that's not because people aren't educated. It's because people are distracted. We have so many things going on in our lives, whether it's kids pulling on our shirt, asking for more veggie straws, or our dog needs to go out, or we're getting pings on our phone. There is just a lot distracting us. So we have to write and edit a bit differently. Okay. So if you look at this, I love looking at this because it really, it tells you what those levels are, right? So this sign, if you hit this sign, you'll hit that bridge. That is technically a 4th grade reading level. Okay. People are reading at a lower level than this when they're distracted. If you think about a 12th grade reading level, Harvard Law Review, most of the content you're going to see online should not be at that high level, even if it's highly technical content, because people just don't have the focus when they're reading things online to really dig in like that. So, like I said, people are distracted. The best practice is always say writing at an 8th grade level is the standard. And again, that's not because you're trying to dumb down concepts or make things more simple for people because they don't have that educational background. You're trying to cater to an increasingly distracted and content fatigued audience. Okay, so that's like when you're editing inbound marketing content, and I'm going to explain what inbound marketing is in just a second. When you're writing and editing any kind of content for online, you have to remember that the person reading it is so distracted and they're reading a million different types of content and looking at different types of media a day. So you have to edit with that in mind. Okay, so now that we know how people read online, let's look at inbound marketing. What is inbound marketing? And I would love to hear how many people have actually worked on inbound marketing, whether that's writing or editing. I don't know if we can throw up a poll or something like that to sort of find out what our viewers, what their experience is with inbound marketing. I'm curious. So inbound marketing cuts through all of the noise and the distraction that people have to deal with to give specific people exactly what they want, when they want, at the right time, and it all happens through content. Okay? So inbound marketing is about reaching the right prospects at the right time, that right type of content, but it's about doing it without using sales terms and sales words and the kinds of things that we're used to, right? So we're used to traditional types of marketing, and those traditional types of marketing are called outbound marketing. So that's all the stuff that's been around forever and ever and ever. TV ads, cold email, email spam, billboards, cold calls. It's all of the stuff that just feels kind of sleazy and kind of slimy. It doesn't feel customized. It doesn't feel personalized. Yes, inbound marketing includes email marketing. Yep. So inbound marketing, blog articles, social media posts, emails. It even includes media like podcasts, webinars, videos, if you've ever had to edit a script for something like that. Ebooks, guides, white papers, case studies. Those are all inbound marketing because they're written really specifically and they're edited really specifically for specific audiences. So it's not like the mass market, here's a TV ad for everybody. It's here, let's write this specific type of content and let's cater it to a specific type of person. So best practices, however, usually say that online digital content should not have sales language. The promotional language is actually a cognitive burden. So if someone thinks that you're trying to sell them something, they're going to click away, they're going to disappear from your site, and you're never going to hear from them again. But inbound marketing is sort of like this delicate balance of that, right? So it takes that promotional language, but it delivers it in a way that makes sense for the reader without feeling sleazy or weaselly or slimy. And it's not, just to be sure, it's not about keyword stuffing. It's not about self-promotion. It's not about SEO 100% of the time. It's about hitting the right notes for the right audience at the right time. And you're going to hear me say that a lot. I'm saying the right content at the right time for the right audience. And that's really what inbound marketing is all about. And there are quite a few things that come into play that make that happen. Okay, so this is a great quote. I love it. The key to delivering the best results to searchers and Google is to never forget that your content is meant to be read by real people. And this is sort of the background on inbound marketing. This is why it works, because it takes the person who's actually reading it into account when you're coming up with it, when you're writing it, when you're editing it, when you're, when you're completely formulating the entire concept. Okay, so if you're a copy editor, what does this mean for you? How do you edit specifically for inbound marketing? So it's interesting because when we, at my company, when we vet copy editors, we go through a pretty specific process, and we like to have copy editors who have a journalism background or who've worked in inbound marketing before, because there's quite a few specific things that you have to be familiar with. And these are some of them, right? So with inbound marketing, there's this whole idea of the buyer's journey, okay? So you start, when you're editing, you need to have brand background. You need to know the voice of the brand. This is a huge, huge, huge one. You need to know what their personality is and what perspective they're coming from in order to write and edit for them. You need to know the persona. We'll get into all of these four things. I'm going to delve a bit deeper into them as we go on. The persona, so who's the content for? Because remember, inbound is about delivering the right content to the right people at the right time. The keyword, this is super important. SEO does matter. It's not all about SEO, but you do need to know what your keyword focus is. And then the buyer's journey, okay? So are they at an awareness, consideration, or decision stage? And for anyone who hasn't heard of inbound marketing before, it's a pretty popular thing right now. It was really created, the sort of concept was created by a company called HubSpot. So if you've heard of HubSpot or you're ever doing client work and you have to work in HubSpot or you hear someone mention HubSpot, that is all inbound marketing. Okay, so let's start with the first one, brand background. Okay, so this is the brand voice, right? Humans thrive on connection and we personify absolutely everything, which includes brands. So voice is super, super, super important when you're editing inbound content. Really, when you're editing any content, you need to know what the voice of the company or the brand or the organization that you're editing for or you're writing for is. And it's also important as a copy editor not to edit the voice out. This is something as someone who manages copy editors, we frequently run into. Sometimes it's tempting to edit for precision and being more concise, but sometimes what that means is editing the voice out. So it's always important when you sit down to edit something to make sure that you have a handle on the brand voice. Next up is the persona. So a buyer persona is basically the semi-fictional representation of a customer. And this is usually, companies come up with this, marketing companies come up with these based on actual interviews with actual customers. So if you're a company that is selling, let's see, if you're selling, I don't know, kids' bicycles, right? So you'd have some personas. And those personas might be moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas, preschools, elementary schools. Those might be your personas. And then what a marketing company does is they interview actual customers and they come up with all of these different things like pain points, their demographics, where they get their information, how they like to make purchases, what might prevent them from becoming a customer, what they might need to become a customer. And all of this goes into this buyer persona. And I have an example here of what it might look like from the client perspective. And basically what happens is when you're writing or editing inbound marketing content, this buyer persona is so important because if your buyer persona is, say, a physicist versus a marketing professional, you're going to write and edit that content completely differently based on who those people are. And a single company can have those two personas at the same time. So if you're editing a blog post for a client, and you know that the client or the persona is someone specific, you can make sure that you're editing according to what that person would expect to read. So persona is super, super important. If you have an inbound marketing client, you're editing for them, writing for them, and you don't have this information, I definitely recommend checking in and seeing if you can get this information because it will change how you edit and how you write. Next
Hey, Chaviva.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in. We've got a question.
Oh, great.
Teresa wants to know, is it better to have a broad persona in case everyone might like your content, or is it better to be very specific?
So that's interesting. So usually what we recommend that a company has is like a buyer profile and then a buyer persona. So your buyer profile is like really general, right? So that you know, okay, people who like bikes, like kids' bikes, it's going to be like this wide swath of people who are connected to or buying gifts for children. And then within your buyer personas, it's important to sort of break those down and then to provide content based on those personas. Because every buyer, every customer, everyone who's reading content online has a very different perspective that they're coming to you with. So for, we'll go with this bike analogy. I was looking at I have a she shed and I was looking at my window and I saw my kid's bike. So let's go with the bike. All right. So for your general buyer profile, it's people who work with kids or who are tied to kids in some way, who have, a gift buying opportunity coming up, who, really love the outdoors. So then your buyer personas, for example, mom and dad. Well, their buyer pain point might be something like, oh, well, I don't think it's safe. I'm worried about safety. So then you would write blog posts and you would write content geared toward, safe riding habits for kids and like safe spaces for kids and how to properly purchase the helmet and things like that. And your content would be very focused on that. If you're a grandparent, you're probably less concerned about the safety and you're maybe more concerned about, different types of trends, like what's popular, what do kids like, what are the cool bikes that they're getting right now. And then you'd want to write content geared toward that and you'd want to edit toward that. From like a writer and editor perspective, when you sit down with this kind of content and you put yourself in the shoes of that persona, you can sort of think as you're editing, okay, does what's in this blog post make sense to me as that buyer? Or is this maybe more geared toward like the preschool persona? So it's really important to have those specific types of personas and to be able to edit and write toward them, but it's also good to just have a general profile. And then the fourth thing that you're going to need is the buyer's journey. So this is also something that's a big part of inbound marketing. The buyer's journey is sort of split into three main stages. There's a fourth one that comes after, but the three that you really produce a lot of content for are awareness, which is saying, hey, I have a problem. Consideration says, I need to figure out a solution to my problem. And then decision says, I know what the solution I need is, and I'm ready to invest in it. The fourth stage is called delight. It's sort of where you want to keep your customers, so you provide them with, follow-up and supplementary content. But these are the three primary stages that we, in the industry, we're producing content for and editing content for. So let's look a bit more deeply into these and what the differences are. Okay. All right, so awareness stage content. So this is also called top of the funnel. It's a lot of lingo. Don't let it trip you up. If you work in inbound marketing, you'll hear a lot of this stuff thrown around a lot, but don't let the lingo or the terminology stress you out. So awareness stage content is informative, and it helps people answer basic questions and solve simple problems. It's free of sales language, sometimes in the final paragraph or in links throughout the article. There will be links to the company's own product or service or whatever they're offering. But sometimes there's nothing in the final paragraph. It's just educational content. And the goal here is to create thought leadership, industry expertise, and to really just educate people, right? We're writing for actual people who have actual problems. And it's interesting because I ran into this earlier today. Actually, I was editing something for a client, and the content was actually created by the client themselves, the client itself, and it was super promotional. And it was, throughout the article, it was saying, oh, we offer this, and this is our product. And that's not the kind of thing you want to see in awareness stage content, because these are people who Googled something, and they clicked on the blog post, or they clicked on the infographic, or they're reading your social media posts, and they just want education. So I've got a couple examples here. Let's see if this works. All right, so this is an example from my company, SmartBug. So this is a blog post. This is your run-of-the-mill blog post, and it's about logo design. The entire blog post is just educational. It's sort of guiding you through a problem. So this is someone's gonna come here, they're gonna say, I'm trying to figure out, how do I get a logo designed? So Aubrey wrote this blog post. It gives lots of tips, lots of ideas, lots of advice. There is not a single mention in here of the products or the services that we offer. There are some little CTAs in here, calls to action, and you'll see those a lot in inbound content, but they're not really sort of aggressive. In fact, we're linking out to other websites. Canva, that's a design site. Wix, logo maker. So we're not really, this is awareness, right? We're not trying to sell someone something. We're saying, hey, you have a problem. We know how to fix that problem. Here's a bunch of information about how we can help you. So when we're editing this, we're looking to make sure that it doesn't have any self-promotional content in it, and that it's just straight up helpful. Okay, I'm gonna go back over here. Let's go back. Another one, I have an example of an ebook here. Ebooks are also really popular at all of the stages, actually, of inbound content. I see a question over here. How would the stages change for nonprofit inbound marketing? The stages are basically exactly the same for nonprofit, because whether you're selling a service, a product, an idea, you have to think of everybody as, sort of in the same way. So if you have a nonprofit that does, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Let's say you're a food bank. You're a nonprofit food bank. So at the awareness stage, you're putting out social posts, you're putting out blog articles, you're putting out ebooks, different things to appeal to who your personas are. So your personas might be donors. They might be people who need your nonprofit's assistance. They could be businesses. If you're a food bank, one of your personas could be local restaurants that happen to have excess food. And you would approach it in the exact same way, right? The final stage, which we'll get to in a bit, that decision stage would basically be, as opposed to them buying from you, it would sort of be from them, partnering with you. But there's, levels of content that you can produce for any kind of business, any kind of organization that all fit into this inbound marketing model. We'll look at this ebook example here that I have. So this is a company called Eagles Flight. They do corporate events, and they're all about fun corporate events. So this is an event planner kit that was put together, and it's just this really cool, gives everything for an event planner, like what they could need. There's lots of stats, lots of information about the events industry. It goes through, there's lots of awesome graphics, there's lots of information, lots of call outs of content. And these are calls to action, little CTAs that also drive you to other places on their website that give you more content. But the great thing about the whole thing is like it's branded and it talks about the company, but nothing in here says, hey, hire us, let us do your event. This is all about providing education. It's about empowering the reader to say, oh my gosh, like I have a problem and all of this is super helpful to help me solve it. And there's really nothing in here that is self-promotional until you get to the very, very end. And at the very end, sometimes what you'll find is there will just be like, hey, this talks about who they are, what they are, simple call to action, but it's really short. It's on the very last page. It's 40 pages in, and it's not the focus. The focus is making sure that the reader feels confident and comfortable and that you're giving them content that works, right? So the next stage is consideration stage content, which is middle of the funnel, MOFU, as those in the business say. And this digs a bit deeper into thought leadership and displaying your industry expertise. And remember, this is approaching the person who says, okay, so I have this problem, I need to figure out a solution. So they're like a bit deeper into this decision process, right? So this delivers value in order to help them decide how to resolve their issue. So this is usually ebooks, guides, checklists, things that will sort of, work your product or your service or whatever a bit deeper into the content, but still without being overtly, hey, buy our product, buy our service, we're awesome, we're amazing, look at all of our testimonials, and it's not self-promotional. Really, no inbound marketing content is hyper self-promotional because it's about the end user, it's about the person reading the content. So a couple of examples here. Here's a guide. This is also from SmartBug. This one's about the psychology of inbound marketing. So it's branded for us, obviously, but the whole thing goes through and it talks about the psychology of inbound marketing. And the cool thing about this, so you're a bit deeper in the funnel, right? So you're in the middle of the funnel, you're trying to you're like, I know I have a problem, how can I possibly solve it? This takes the reader through. It's a really long little ebook here. You'll hear ebook and guide sort of tossed around. But then when you come down to the bottom, as opposed to being on like the final page, you have this little about section. So this is like you're working one extra step in here. So as opposed to just having a final page that has your contact information, this says, hey, you just read all this great information about the psychology of inbound marketing. And hey, we're the people who wrote it, and this is what we do. So you're adding a little bit more, a little bit deeper in. And then a checklist is also one thing. I don't know if while editing or writing you've come across anything like this, but this is also a pretty clever way of marketing yourself without being too aggressive. It's a little checklist. This is from Trulia, which is a mortgage company, if memory serves, or a house hunting company. And so it gives you this cool checklist. You're working through it. You're like, oh, hey, all of this is really great. And then down here you get to the very bottom and it says, hey, download our app. And let us help you, right? So it's adding sort of an extra step to that content. And all of this is important as an editor because, it shows you what you should be looking for and what you should be editing for. So like if you're reading an awareness stage piece of content. It's a blog post, it's educational. And in the second paragraph, it's like, hey, we offer this great service. You know that that shouldn't be there, and you know to edit that out or to contact whoever you're working with and say, hey, I don't think this should be in here. This is awareness stage, right? Consideration stage, it can be a bit more murky. Consideration stage is the hardest content to write and edit for, in my opinion, because the person reading it isn't quite fresh to the topic or industry or even the company, but they're not exactly ready to see how your precise company or service can actually solve their problem, which is where decision stage, this is the final stage, right? This is the bottom of the funnel. This is right before they say, I'm going to become a customer, or you know what, I think I'm going to go with a competitor. So this content, this copy is all about talking up your product, your service, your solution. This one is where you get super self-promotional, but without being too salesy or sleazy, that used car salesman kind of cold calling and cold emailing type of content. And the reader has enough options in mind. They just need to make that final reason. They need to know the final reason to choose your product or service. So if you're editing something and it says, please edit this. This is decision stage content and it's purely educational, then you know that it's not quite where it needs to be and you can edit appropriately for that. White papers are an example. They're kind of going out of fashion right now, but case studies are huge as decision stage content. I don't know if anyone's read any, edited any case studies, but here's one from Slack, actually, featuring Lyft, which I guess just announced their IPO. But so the way that this works, I mean, you can see here. So this is about Lyft and how Slack, which is sort of a chat, intra-office chat service, works. And so what I like to do here, so you can see how many times, so here, this is the case study over here. Obviously this is a quote, so it's gonna be mentioned there. But so it talks about, it's gonna talk through the pain points. Why did this company use Slack? And you can see Slack's brand name is mentioned tons of times in this because this is decision stage. So this is where you really start talking about your business a lot and how you help people solve problems, which is why for case studies, it's a really great piece of content for this. So if you're editing or writing decision stage content and it's not really talking about the company itself, you know that it's probably not in the right place. And you can, talking about yourself is mandatory at this stage. So it's super, super important to make sure that you know the types, where in the buyer's journey, the content that you're editing is for if you're working with inbound content. Super important. Okay, so some pro tips. All right, so a lot of this may seem obvious, but when you're working on online content, whether it's a blog or an ebook or pillar pages are these really cool things where they turn an ebook into like an actual web page because people don't like downloading stuff. People like to read it on the page and be able to access it whenever they want. So white space is super important. Short one-thought paragraphs. And I know this is a really hard one. A lot of our writers and our editors don't always catch this, but giant paragraphs are not where we're at right now with digital content. So if you can edit and split things up so it's a bit more digestible and there's a bit more white space, do that. It's so much easier on the reader. And if you pop around on the internet and you start looking at sites you really like and sites you don't like, you'll probably start to notice that chunking that's going on. Bulleted lists, obviously people love lists. It pulls in your eye. It gives you quick information. People like to be able to, find ideas quickly, especially because we're distracted and we're scanning. And if you're being pulled in a bunch of different directions and getting notifications, if you see a bulleted list, you're going to go straight there. So make sure you use those. Make sure that you're editing and writing for keywords. Make sure you're emphasizing them appropriately, whether it's linking or bolding or italicizing. Make your subheads really thoughtful because those will pull people too. If someone comes to your blog or the ebook they're looking at and they're trying to find information quickly that's going to solve their problem, you want to have subheads that make sense. And obviously calls to action. So things that make people move in a different direction, make them go to a different spot on your website, make them reach out to you, schedule a free trial, whatever it is. Calls to action are super important in inbound marketing because it's how people move through that buyer's journey. So if you're editing content for basically any stage of inbound marketing and there's no calls to action, whether it's at the end of the blog post or in the middle of the blog post, then you'll know to be able to tell whoever you're working with, hey, calls to action, super important in inbound marketing. You should probably add them in. Next up, this is a really big one, and I know it's probably going to seem pretty obvious, but I know that when we are trying out new copy editors, this is probably the one step that actually trips people up the most, is checking the facts. Inbound content is different than if you're editing for a newspaper or if you're editing, fiction, or even if you're editing most nonfiction. If you're used to academic editing, it's very different. Inbound content is chock full of data, citations, company names, statistics. Online content is all about linking, right? So when you're editing, or even when you're writing, make sure that all of your links are accurate. Make sure the data that you're citing is accurate. I know as someone who writes inbound content, sometimes I'll have so many tabs open and I'm pulling information from so many places that things can get muddled up. So it's super important, to check everything and double check it even, because people are going to be clicking around, and when people see inconsistencies, they always notice them. They never notice anything when it's consistent, but they notice everything when it's inconsistent or if the numbers don't match up. Math also is a big, important one, especially if you're dealing with like a data-heavy topic. So, my company, we deal with a lot of software as a service companies and productivity solutions and all of these high-tech things that do a lot of, statistics that change from year to year. So that math is super important.
Hey, Chaviva.
Yeah.
We have another question. An attendee said that you skipped from personas to buyer's journey. Could you go back and talk a little bit about the keywords?
About keywords?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I didn't include a separate slide on keywords actually because they're becoming less of a focus. I mean, keywords are important, and it's important to have an idea of what that keyword is going to be in your post. But the thing is, and there's been so many posts written on this all over the internet lately, Google is really smart. So we think we have to write so that Google will be able to notice us, right? So that search engines will be able to find us. But the reality is Google, all of the algorithms are so smart, we don't have to go out of our way to be found. We just have to produce high quality content that isn't sort of content mill content. That's not keyword packed, because you actually get dinged and you actually suffer if you keyword stuff. So like our best practices are a keyword should appear basically 3 to 5 times. And that includes like the blog title, subheadings, and inside the post. And keywords are usually, those are chosen based on, like at our company, we have people who do a bunch of keyword research, and we come up with those keywords based on competition. So like, what are this client's competitors doing? And like, how are they performing on these keywords? And how many people are searching for these keywords? And also it's important to note that we say keywords, but really these days, the most powerful keywords are actually more like key phrases, because people don't search, you're not going to go to Google and type in cheese and expect to find, results on how to make cheese at home. People actually search based on phrases. So more and more, that's where keywords are going. So that's another thing, if you have, if you're editing a lot of inbound content and you're just getting a lot of single word keywords or, 2-word keywords, it's a good place to have a conversation as an editor or a writer with the person who's assigning you stuff and say, what are some keyword phrases we should be using here? Because that's just how people search. So, and as an editor also on keywords as well, make sure that the keyword is actually showing up in the content. Sometimes writers have the best intentions and they try to write toward that keyword, but they write more to the keyword idea rather than the actual keyword. So it's important to make sure that it does get in there. And don't be afraid to tell, the client, whoever you're working with, hey, this keyword is not in here at all, and make suggestions on where to actually put it, that it's not going to sound forced. That's the hardest thing with keywords. So this is all, I mean, you guys know this. This is all pretty basic stuff. Being concise with online content, be direct. Remember, you need to be adding value. So I always say, if you can get rid of adverbs, speech phrases, redundancies. I actually read a pretty well-known blog recently that in the first sentence used the word recent history. And I was like, no, don't do that. Complex words. I was working with a client this morning, and one of their blog posts used the word precipitous. And it was just, it's one of those $100 words that people who are distracted and people who are reading tons of content every day and just absorbing so much media don't have the time to get through words like that. And it can be hard, but the simpler and more concise and more direct you make it, avoiding industry lingo and jargon, the more to the point you're getting. And the whole idea, right, is to help people solve problems. So if you have a problem, you don't want to have to dig through tons and tons of copy to try to figure out what the answer to your problem is. You want someone to be able to help you. And if that brand, that organization can help you, then you're more likely to become a customer or get involved with them. This is another big one with inbound marketing, especially because it's a lot of business to business companies, or even business to customer, B2C, B2B, localizing, right? So if you're working with a client whose potential customers, their personas are in a very specific geographic area, make sure you're using the right terms, right? Because people will notice that. So in this example I have here, if you think this is a hoagie, you're from Philly. But depending upon where you are, it might be a sub sandwich, a grinder, a wedge. It could be whatever it is. So you need to know your client, and you need to know where they're located. You need to know where their personas are located, so you can make sure that that localized language makes sense. Question here from Samantha. How do you tell the difference between jargon and actual industry standard terminology that signals you're a thought leader? This is a really great question. So when we hire new clients here, or when we don't hire them, they hire us. When we get new clients, I do a process, what I call writer onboarding. And that's basically, I sit down with the client and I go through sort of a worksheet I have where I talk them through voice. We work on keywords, we work on different types of things so that we can really figure out what their personality is as a brand. And one part of that actually is getting a list from them of industry terms that we should avoid and what we should use. Because in addition to just sort of looking at, most companies have a really good idea of the terms that they don't want to use because their competitors are using it, or because it's outdated, or it's too trendy, or it's too niche. They have those lists. You would be surprised. And then the industry standard terminology, I find that they usually don't have those kinds of lists up front, but as they start to read the content that's being produced for them, they are like, oh, wait, no, actually don't use that word, use this word. Or, oh, we prefer ebook to be lowercase e, capital B, or we prefer it to be this way. There's like a million different ways to write ebook. And you sort of gather those as you're going. And so if you're working with a client consistently and you're editing for them consistently, it's like we have this gigantic spreadsheet for all of our clients that has their specific copy preferences. So our editors pull that up every time they sit down to write, so they can look up the specific client and say, okay, this person has these preferences and this person has these preferences. So really, it's about knowing what your client needs and what they expect. If you're a freelancer, it can be a bit harder. If you're in-house, it's a bit easier because you can, request that, or you can do a writer onboarding, sort of like I mentioned. But there is a lot of terminology that just in general is sort of going out of favor. Like the term thought leadership itself is actually getting a bit of a beating right now. People aren't such fans of it. A lot of other terminology is sort of falling out of favor too. Like the word robust is very unpopular right now in the inbound marketing world, just because it's sort of a throwaway idea. You have a robust software solution, or you have a robust platform. It sort of has lost its meaning. So there's some terms, like when you're working in the industry, you sort of slowly start to see disappear, but it's always good to just really check with the client and find out, because it's better to get it straight from the horse's mouth than to make any kind of assumptions, really. Conclusions. I think no matter what kind of writer or editor you are, conclusions are incredibly difficult. Some people, it's funny, it's sort of like you're either a geometry person or an algebra person, and you're either a conclusion person or an introduction person. So conclusions in inbound marketing specifically are really hard. We have this conversation a lot internally with our editors and our writers. Even the CEO, we've talked about it. It's hard to write conclusions. I think personally, it's even harder to write introductions. I'm a big believer in writing your introduction last, after you've written your conclusion, because then you can tie it back effectively. In inbound marketing, you're going to find a ton of blog posts online that say things like, now that we've told you about XYZ, it's time to sign up for our demo. Or, don't you feel better about this? Call us now to find out more about blah, 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 blah. And it's jarring for the reader, because they've read all this great educational content and they've gotten so much information from you. And then you're like smacking them in the face and saying, now buy our stuff. So it's a very delicate and difficult thing to do, to write conclusions. So my two best policies are taking one of two routes. So you can either ask the following 3 questions and then write your conclusion based on these. So those are, why should the reader care? Why now? And what's next? Which can help you write your conclusion, which can then help you write your introduction. Or you can write your conclusion based on the one main takeaway, because a lot of times, again, remember, these are distracted readers. So they're going to read the introduction, they're going to scan, get down to the conclusion. And chances are they're going to miss that one central idea that you wanted them to walk away with, especially if your introduction hasn't been super strong and clear on what the blog post is about or what the ebook is about. So what you have to do is put that one takeaway in the conclusion. No zingers, no recaps, no clever phrasing, just what that one thing is. And usually what that one thing is something that should inspire them to act, that should encourage them to take a next step or do something else. So I have an example here. I'm going to tell you guys, it was super hard for me to find examples of conclusions that I liked, even my own work. I looked at my own blog posts and I was like, man, none of these are super amazingly, awesomely, inspiring. So I sort of spent some time digging around and I really liked this one. So this is 7 weird ways to help combat hermit habits as a remote worker. This was relevant because my whole company is remote, so I really liked this. So 7 weird ways, right? So it goes through, you have a really long introduction, probably longer than most online content really should be. And then you go into these 7 different things, right? So I'm reading, I'm like, oh, set a rule for going out in public. Okay, that's interesting. Playlists. Always see some bullets. I'm going to read here. I'm going to scan some clever memes. I get down to the bottom. Never put the word conclusion and then write a conclusion. That's my one major piece of advice for you. Never write conclusion and then write the conclusion. It's a jarring thing for the reader to be like, oh, we're at the end now. Okay. I like this conclusion. I think it gets to the point. It just says the best thing to do is to have a little compassion for yourself and then try something new. So it's not going to go through and recap the 7 things, which I appreciate. It does a little bit. But it really just says, okay, you're working from home. Like, if you're in a rut, be gentle with yourself. It's not a jarring conclusion. It's not a, let me tell you all the things that this blog post said conclusion. It's not providing any zingers. It just says, okay, like at the end of the day, there you go. And for a remote worker, that's all you need to know, basically. I can speak from personal experience. As a hermit, I get out every day, so it's not such an issue for me. But for someone who is Googling and finding this article, that's really what they need to know, is that, it's okay if you're at home all day. I see another question. Oh, I see 2 questions. Why is thought leadership going out of style in content marketing? The term thought leadership is it's a bit saturated. Everyone wants to be a thought leader, and what is a thought leader, and how is thought leadership different than just plain old leadership? If you're a company, I was actually talking this through with my husband, because he also sort of was like, well, what's the difference between leadership and thought leadership? And sort of like a good example is, so I think I have 3 kids, so I think in diapers, right? So Pampers or Huggies are leaders in the diaper industry. But a thought leader is someone like Honest Co., right? Because they have this platform about social justice and like the environment and all of these other things, whereas Pampers and Huggies have been around for a million years and sort of established the disposable diaper industry. So that's how I sort of think of them separately. So there is definitely a difference between leadership and thought leadership. But for some reason right now, thought leadership is just one of those jargony terms that's thrown around so much that it's sort of losing its meaning. So that's where that's at. Our other question here, I work in federal government. I teach employees how to write documents in plain language. Good for you. That's got to be really tough. Definitely a connection between knowing your audience and speaking to them in their language and successful marketing. Yeah, the Hoagie submarine grinder one is a really good one. I was trying to find some other examples actually of foods that are unique to region, and most of them are, my husband's British, so he talks about courgettes and I talk about zucchinis. We have lots of language barriers. All right, so your major takeaways from this that I hope you walk away with. Personality is important. Never edit the personality or the voice out of something that you're editing in inbound marketing. It's super important. Really anything that you're editing, right? I think it's one of the things that I have to go back to our copy editors about a lot, is not editing out that voice. The second thing is knowing your target persona, the brand voice, and the buyer's journey stage. You'll notice I left out the keyword. Keyword's important, but it's not my big takeaway. My big takeaway is you have to know who the content is for. You have to know the brand voice and where they are in their buyer's journey, so that content really, you can edit and you can write it specifically for that person at the right stage, at the right time in their buyer's journey. And lastly, just edit with confidence. If you see something and you're like, I don't think that this fits, if it's a piece of inbound marketing and you're like, I don't think this is written for the right stage that it's supposed to be at, suggest rewrites, make recommendations, be confident when you're editing. All right. We are at the Q&A portion.
We have a question in the Q&A box. Abby is asking, in terms of keywords and buzzwords, where does empower fall?
Empower?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Just as a term, empower?
I think she's asking as a term. Abby, if you want to follow up on that a little bit. With NGOs, that's a commonly used term.
Okay. All right. So as far as okay, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, it's one of those terms that when I see a term come across my desk a lot, and it sort of feels like that it's being used way too much, I really just try to rewrite it. That's like that term robust, right? In the business to business world right now, robust, or even, I guess in the business to consumer world also, robust is such a word that it's just overused. Like, what does it mean? There are so many more ways that I can be precise and talk about something, like if it's a piece of software. I can say, oh, it's a robust solution. Okay, well, what makes it a robust solution? And then write that. Because people see these words and they see them so much. Disrupting, yeah, that's great. That's a really good one. If you see overused words, suggest edits, suggest changes, rewrite it. Think about, a new way to see it, because what that does is it positions the organization or the brand uniquely, because if everyone in their space and in their industry is using that same term, then it doesn't really differentiate it for the reader. And what the whole goal is to differentiate yourself for the reader. I work for a nonprofit. We find that empower is overused and also suggests that the power doesn't lie with the subject that's being empowered. Yeah. I think it's hard in the nonprofit space. I worked in nonprofits for a very, very long time, doing social media management and content creation. And the nonprofit world is really hard, especially for niche nonprofits. Inbound marketing for niche nonprofits is even harder because you have such a small audience. I mean, the nice thing about inbound marketing, though, is it really does work for any type of audience, but you just have to be producing the right type of content, and you really have to know who your personas are. That's why that persona point is really important. Do we have any other questions? For some reason, I can't see the Q&A box. Oh, there it is. One second. Haha. Let me move this over here. What else do we have over here? Does anyone else have, do I have any advice for a former TV journalist who wants to pivot into inbound content writing marketing? That's a really great question. It's interesting. So our company is growing at breakneck speed, which is awesome. And so we're constantly hiring writers and editors. And it's so interesting to look at the resumes and see where people are kind of coming from. As a TV journalist, I think that you are probably in a pretty unique position because video is such a huge thing right now. And I think that there are some inbound marketing agencies that are pretty heavily focused on video creation, whether that's, about us videos or explainer videos. So you actually have a pretty unique position, I would say, being someone who is in TV. Just make sure that your resume is on point. Be honest. I think one of the things that we find a lot is people say they have experience in XYZ, or, they know what this is, but then when it comes down to actual interviews and touching base with them, it really, it comes out that they don't have that experience. But I think that we sort of live in a world right now where you can go from one thing to another thing pretty easily if you're willing to learn and do the background and really know where you're coming from. Who were my inbound marketing heroes? Oh, that's a really great question. Honestly, this is going to be super cheesy. I don't know if any of my coworkers are on this call right now. My inbound marketing heroes are my coworkers, really. I learn incredibly new things every single day from them. They're some of the smartest people I know. When I actually came to SmartBug Media, I had zero formal experience in inbound marketing. I didn't realize that a lot of what I had been doing was inbound marketing at my prior job. But I learned so much more about really digging into who buyers are, who the customers are, really focusing on the customer and what their journey is. And yeah, my coworkers are my heroes. That's super cheesy, I know. Do we have any other questions? Oh, here we go. I didn't scroll down. There's more questions here. Can I share my onboarding doc? I can I'll put together a version that I can share with you guys. It's my favorite thing to do with our clients. They love it. Our consultants and strategists love it. There's some fun activities in there that really get them thinking about their brand in a different way. Because what I'm sort of discovering is a lot of companies just don't know what their voice is. And I think when you're editing and writing content, it's so important to know what that voice is. Can I give a more of a definition of case study? So a case study is basically, I am a company and I helped, so let's say I am, I'm a marketing company. I'm SmartBug Media, and I helped a company grow their business by X%. So I'm going to do a case study on that client. I'm going to go to them and I'm going to say, hey, we did this great thing for you and you've seen tons of awesome results. Can we tell your story? So it's about telling their story so that you can help other potential customers see how you helped people in their industry. And it's actually one of the most powerful and compelling ways that people become customers is they're like, oh my gosh, you helped this bank get, X number more customers, and I'm a bank and I need more customers. So they read your case study. Yeah, you're telling their story basically. What tips do you have for writing inbound to an older audience who's used to seeing old-fashioned direct marketing and non-savvy web writing? That's a really interesting question, actually. Gosh. I mean, I don't think about my audiences in terms of age necessarily. I mean, when you're doing persona work, you know, a lot of times you do end up with your personas are older. I've actually worked with a client who does senior living, and writing content for their clients. It's, you know, it's pretty much the same. It's just a bit more straightforward. You try to avoid using lingo. You try to be direct and to the point, give them exactly what they need. You don't do a lot of explaining. That would be probably the one major difference. Also, they, believe it or not, they really love video. Finding editing jobs, freelance or full-time in content marketing. I know there's a website called Hubstaff that works with, so like I mentioned HubSpot earlier. It's sort of, you know, the main inbound marketing platform. So a lot of inbound marketing companies work through HubSpot. Like, we're a HubSpot partner. So you can find a lot of jobs there. I mean, you know, I found SmartBug old fashioned way. I think it was Glassdoor is where I found this job. Compliance. Working in financial services and compliance rules sometimes hinder the more fun language we try to use in reaching credit union members. We actually have a couple of clients who are credit unions. So we have been here. Legal and compliance are a writer's worst nightmare in inbound marketing most of the time. I think there are ways to get around it. It's sort of being energetic without being playful or silly or jokey. So if you think of the word energetic and you sort of keep that in mind, I think it can kind of position your content a bit better. But compliance is really, really tough. You have to get clever and creative, but if anything, it's making you a more, you know, a more clever writer and a more creative writer to be able to sort of get around that type of language. So many questions. Do you have any experience in writing inbound marketing for the biotech medical industry? If so, do you have any insight for copy editors in those industries? I actually just finished writing a ton of web copy for a genetics company. It was one of the hardest things that I've ever done. I spent a lot of time on the phone with the client. When it comes to really technical industries, I actually have a blog post coming out soon on our website about this, about writing for boring or technical industries. My biggest piece of advice as a writer or an editor is, from a writer's perspective, getting on the phone with those people, those subject matter experts, and just having them talk. Because when you hear about it from actual people, you can actually write it for actual people. And then from a copy editor's perspective, listening to those calls, if you have access to them, can be really, really informative. But just spending time looking at what's working online for companies that are doing well. So for biotech medical, you know, looking at some of the genetic companies that are online and how they're writing content that's super accessible. Because even the people who are reading those, even if they're PhDs, they still want that content to be quick, easy. They want to get to the point because they can be the smartest people in the world, but they're just as distracted as the rest of us. We're getting pretty close here. What advice would you give to an inbound writer struggling with the balance of providing knowledgeable content in a personalized way, not sounding like a school essay? Gosh, that's a really overarching question. I'm gonna have to think about that. I don't want to like skirt over it or scoot over it, but I have to think about that one. Let's see what I have here. Conclusions in general seem rather insulting. The reader knows the article is ending. They scroll down. God bless them. Why not just end it? That is exactly what my counterpart at the company, Joe, always says. He's like, well, if I don't have like a nice, like if I don't have an easy conclusion to write, I'm just going to end it. And it's totally valid. People, for some reason, sort of expect there to be some type of conclusionary, wrap everything up and send them on their way kind of an idea. But I think that depending upon what type of content you're writing, I think that you can work that into your final paragraphs without it feeling like a conclusion. Especially if you're writing like a X steps to do X, Y, Z, I think it kind of naturally caters itself to a conclusion. But also another tip is adding a personal piece of advice or a personal take on what you've just written as a conclusion. So you sort of send people on their way knowing that a real person has been writing for them. So that's also another tip. I know I've missed a bunch of questions and things in here. Let me just pop forward. If you have like actual questions, you can contact me. My personal email, kvetching.editor@gmail.com. You can also email me at my work email, chaviva@smartbugmedia.com. And these are the upcoming webinars and ACES boot camps. So you're gonna wanna go to these. I went to an ACES boot camp here in Denver in the fall, and it was wonderful. So I highly recommend it.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us. Again, make sure to check out our upcoming webinars and boot camps. And if you're interested in suggesting a topic for what you want to see for an upcoming boot camp or webinar, you can email us at info@aceseditors.org. So we want to hear what you guys want to see.
All right, thank you.
Thanks everybody.
Bye.